All right, awesome. And we are live. Welcome back to Faraday Academy. My name is Gwen, and I'm here with Austin Gil. He is, I guess, basically a prolific part of the Vue.js community.
That's not true. That's not true.
creates Created an open source library called Vuetensils, and I made a tutorial on this channel on that library about 3 weeks ago. So now I've invited him on to talk a little bit more about his work with Vue and creating the Vuetensils library. So Austin, do you want to introduce yourself to everyone?
Yeah. Hi. Thank you for having me on. By the way, it's really an honor and a pleasure. So my name's Austin. I am a full stack JavaScript developer from San Diego, California. Been doing web development for like 7 years or so, and I got into Vue maybe 3 years ago. Fell in love with it right away. It's really awesome. It makes my life better. I really
Yes.
enjoy working on it. And I just, yeah, kind of recently got into building out a library called Vuetensils because I saw, um, I don't know, kind of scratching my own itch. I wouldn't say I saw a need that people had, but just like I thought it'd be cool. We'll get into some of the things that make it unique, I'm sure, here in a minute.
Okay. So, yeah, we can go ahead and dive into it since you brought it up already. So, with Vuetensils, what were the kind of needs or missing spots, or what itch were you trying to, I guess, fill with it?
Sure. So it got started kind of organically, I guess. I was doing some work on a couple projects, and I noticed that I would build out one project and it would have some components or patterns that were um, common across any project that you're going to build, and then I would move on to the next one, and then I like to build things from scratch, kind of. So um, I would start from scratch and have the need for this pattern. Let's say, like, I always use the example of a dialogue because it works really well. A lot of projects need some sort of dialogue component to like give a message to a user, and so I would like build out a new project and get to the point where it's like, okay, I need to like flash a message to the user, and I'm gonna have to like build that myself again. But I have some code from an old project, so if I just like go to that old project, copy out all the functionality and working parts that I need, and strip out the design that is specific to that project, I can just like bring it over into this project. And that happened so many times that with so many components that eventually I said, well, let me just like take out all of the functionality that's going to be used across every project and just put that into a GitHub repo. And once I have that, then anytime going forward, I can just like literally just copy and paste into the project. And the more I did that, the GitHub repo kind of grew into a collection of several components, and then maybe some directives or some filters or things like that. And eventually I said, this is I'm kind of hitting like an interesting place that I'm building out these components, these like the dialogue component, and um, I have a need for this in many projects, and I just want just like the bare bones HTML, like no styles, no nothing, just the functionality. And I wonder if anyone else might have the need for this as well.
So, you just wanted the bare bones components. That's because every app styled differently, right? So, you didn't want any built in styles because you were going to build the styles, but you needed the same functionality across a bunch of different libraries. Was that your thinking? Or a bunch of different, I guess, apps?
Yeah, exactly. So because I build a lot of things from scratch, I have experience using like Bootstrap or Foundation or Material Design in the past, and those are really good to get yourself up and running quickly.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I kind of like always feel like I've always loved working with CSS. So I tend to try and do a lot of things myself from scratch. I feel like, there's an argument to be made that it's more lightweight because you only include just the styles that you need, um, and all this. Yeah, like I mentioned that in the Vuetensils, like why use it, but in reality, it's mostly the fact that I like doing things myself. Like I like having very fine grain control on what code is going to be shipped out and what it's going to look like. And a lot of libraries, I don't necessarily want to use the styles because it ends up kind of looking like every other site. Or you can always customize the styles from a library. Like Bootstrap, I think, is pretty customizable in terms of like theming and stuff. But yeah, something about like, you can either start with a lot and like pare it down to what you need, or you can start with very little and like build it up. And I've always kind of leaned more towards the build it up
Okay.
approach.
And you're thinking is it's more modular because then you can either bring in your own styles or you can use a styling specific library. I don't like maybe Tailwind or Tacheons or something like that.
Yeah, so utensils started out, and yeah, I don't know if this has come across or to anyone that's like watching that is not familiar. It's literally a Vue component library that has like no styles. And when I say no styles, I mean there is like minimum for like if I have a dialog, you do have to have it fixed position and maybe like centered in the browser, but it has no background color. No, like it just looks like whatever. Any component that's using like an HTML button, you're just going to get that ugly gray, browser styled button. So yeah, in terms of being able to incrementally or use like a utility CSS library like Tailwind, that actually wasn't my initial consideration. Originally, I thought, well, I want people to be able to style it, so I need to provide a bunch of CSS classes anywhere in the markup. Because one of the things that is important to this library is it has to be like everything has to be very accessible. It has to follow like the W3C, ARIA accessibility like best practices. And in order to do that, you kind of have to maintain a somewhat strict control over the markup, which means that I can't provide so much flexibility that anyone can bring their own markup, because then I don't know that the developers or the consumer that's building it is going to provide the correct accessibility roles or attributes, whatever. So anyway, I said I'm going to write some markup to the DOM, and in that to allow for flexibility in styling, I'll provide some classes that like, even though the HTML, like I'm not going to write the styles that are going to attach to these classes. It will allow anyone that knows CSS to easily customize this UI however they want. And someone mentioned like wanting to be able to use Bootstrap or Tailwind or whatever. And I thought, well, that should be easy enough. I mean, you just have a prop that accepts like classes, and then as long as you bind the classes that are passed into the markup, then yeah, like something like Tailwind would work really well in there. It's a little bit funny because the approach that I'm taking is there's a classes prop, which is an object that maps each DOM node to like the list of classes that you want to attach to it. So that's like the only thing that I feel is maybe a little bit awkward, but at the same time, most of the components in there use slots or scope slots. So you're actually providing your own markup. Most of the styling that I've had to do in being a consumer, like dog fooding this myself, I'm not utilizing that classes prop. I'm kind of like passing in a div with its own styles anyway. So.
Yeah, that's true. I don't think I really had trouble styling the library so much because like you said, you provided a class API where I could just kind of style the classes. I think there was a problem where I couldn't use scoped styles with the library. Was that something you specifically didn't want, or was it your intention?
No, so that's actually, I don't use scope styles a lot.
Okay.
So that was an issue that was mentioned in one of the GitHub issues, and there is kind of a there's a simple workaround, which is, Vue has scope styles built in, and sometimes that is an issue, and so the Vue library has its own workaround where you can have like I think there's like a backslash deep backslash and then whatever. There's like a deep CSS modifier that can
Okay.
actually get your scope styles into where you want them to be. Um, so it's like there's a workaround. But yeah, that is something that I hadn't accounted for.
Okay. Yeah, it's not a big deal. I was just wondering if that was like something specific that you meant to put in there, because I know you very carefully crafted this for accessibility, functionality, and other stuff. So I kept thinking, oh, maybe there's a reason why he did this or that. It was kind of fun actually, because I was digging through every single component and the code for every component and was thinking, like, why did he, write this in this way? And it
So I
was,
would love to get into that. Like I feel like there's not a lot of people that are. I don't know. I don't have any contribute. No, there was one person that made like a PR, but a lot of it is like I'm just coding in a silo. So anyone that's looking at the source code, yeah, curious to hear your thoughts.
so I heard so you have one contributor. And when did you release this, like as a public repo?
Um, I don't know. Sometime last year.
Okay, because I heard you on the Views on View podcast talking about it.
Yeah,
Uh,
yeah. So I've talked about it. So I think that's probably around the time that I launched it. I think that was like late last year,
yeah,
or like publicly announced it, I guess. Technically, it's still kind of like a beta version. I haven't released 1.0 yet. Um, I think that I would still like to have more community members kind of like picking it apart and figuring out the bugs, because I'm
yeah.
sure it's kind of weird when it seems like a lot of people are using it, or a good amount of people are using it, and I'm not hearing too much back. There's a few feature requests, but not a whole lot of bug reports, which maybe is a good thing, or maybe like people just aren't using it.
Yeah, I think the thing for me was I was thinking, maybe I could contribute to this, but then, I'm not an accessibility expert. So then I wonder, am I doing it right if I'm contributing? Like, yeah, I can write the JavaScript code, but is it um, going to be accessible and in line with all of the standards and manuals? Because there's that extra layer of learning. So I guess maybe if you had contributor docs, I mean, I didn't see any anyway that you had.
Yeah, so that's definitely one of the issues. Like, it was only recently that I kind of added a license, and there's, like I said, the library kind of came together more as um, some code that I just want to be able to copy and paste. And then I thought, well, it'd be nice to just have it on npm in case I have it in another project. I can keep my projects up to date by publishing the newer version. Um, and yeah, there's some things that, I mean, this is my first kind of foray into open source. So there's a lot of things that I want to I want to improve. Um, Having a contributors guideline would be great. Having a community guideline, because I think that there's a lot of open source projects that um, get some flack for not having, um, you know, like what is it, the just a document that says like to be inclusive to
Like the
people.
code of conduct or something.
Code of conduct, exactly.
Yeah.
That's what I was looking for. Yeah, so I think putting a code of conduct on there would be good. Putting on a contributors guide would be good.
Yeah, definitely. I think it was pretty robust, but yeah, before, like you mentioned, before 1.0, there's probably more components and features that you want. So after you spoke about this and views on Vue, and then I saw you give a talk at where was it? It was VueConf. Before we went on lockdown, it was at the beginning of March. You gave a talk on VueConf, but it wasn't about Vuetensils. But I assume you were talking to people about the library there at the conference. Did you see a lot of people interested in the Vuetensils library?
I wasn't talking to a lot of people about it. Um, it's really a weird library. So I call it like a naked component library, and a lot of the times it's like you find a lot of people that want to use the library that has everything built in. So like reaching for Vue Bootstrap or Vuetify, I think
Yeah.
are two big ones. And Vuetensils definitely doesn't fit in with that crowd because if you're the type of person that wants to have everything and then all of a sudden I'm asking you to write CSS or like, inject in some Tailwind. Although Tailwind I think would match really well for Vuetensils. But,
Okay.
if you're the type of person that wants these things built in and all of a sudden there's an ask of you to do a little bit more, then that's kind of weird. And then you have the other camp that's like, I like to do everything myself. Then I think UI libraries don't really fit in so well. So it's been interesting trying to find the people or trying to find the audience that this fits in with. But they're there because it's got, I don't know, almost 300 stars, and it's got a good good download numbers on npm. So
Yeah, I
uh,
definitely think it's a good idea to just separate those things. Because for me, so when I live stream and build like personal projects, I'll use something like Element or Vuetify that has styles. It has everything for me, so I don't have to worry about the styling. I don't have to worry. There's components for everything you could imagine almost. But when I work with a designer or on a professional project, I noticed that almost always I want to overwrite all the styles in the other library. And for some libraries, that's really frustrating to overwrite everything or take everything out or change things. So I think Vuetensils is a really good idea. Giving you, it basically has the two pieces you need: functionality and accessibility. And then you can get your styling from the design team or from another design library. You're very flexible with how you want to do your designs. But it's still accessible, which is something that, developers definitely need a lot of help with.
yeah, so that's you touch on a good point, which is like I care a lot about accessibility, and I found that even when I was building out projects, even projects I build today, like if it doesn't already exist in utensils, then sometimes I do miss putting it into a project that I'm working on, right?
Yeah.
And I think that there is a really good opportunity for library authors to just solve the accessibility problem for everyone that's using that. And like you as a consumer of the library, like you don't even have to think about it. You don't even have to be aware that accessibility is a thing. Like it's just there. And then some day down the road when you read an article and say, oh, there's like so many people that depend on keyboards for navigation, and you go back to your project and it's like, oh yeah, I got this covered already. Like my dialogue does focus trapping, or I can just press the escape key and like it closes and whatever. When someone else is thinking about that, it's great. And I think that there's a bit of work that browsers can do to kind of automate accessibility for us. And there's a lot that library authors can do. And I think that a lot more library authors are doing. So I think, for example, like Vuetify again, from what I've seen, they do have ARIA attributes and roles built into a lot of their components.
Yeah.
So there's like Bootstrap, I think, does that as well. So yeah, it's good.
Yeah. There were several others when I looked. I think Vuetify has it 100% across all their components, which is really nice. and then your library, and there's probably a couple others that cover with, I can't remember all the standards, but there's, a couple standards out there. Um, yeah, I'm drawing a blank. So I had Joe Caulfield. He's an accessibility guru. He was on my podcast like 2 months ago. And between him and your library, I feel like I've just learned so much about accessibility this year. And it's kind of embarrassing, I guess, that I've been, working in web development for 5 years now. And I haven't ever learned a lot of these things about accessibility. And I've even built apps where I didn't check, using a keyboard. Can someone navigate my app with a keyboard? And it's like you said, I think that has to be abstracted away from developers, because I didn't think about it that much when I was learning. I was spending so much time and effort learning Node and learning Vue, and having to jump into different frameworks and tools and libraries, that it was just one more thing on my plate. And because the client wasn't asking for it, it wasn't always a priority for me. So I think that, like you said, is a huge opportunity for people building the underlying tools to be the ones, I guess, at the forefront of this accessibility.
Yeah, I think that there's also there's a lot that library authors can't do, unfortunately. So, for example, I don't know, maybe Vuetify can do this, because I know that they enforce you to use like a wrapping tag for your entire app.
Yeah.
So they have some flexibility to kind of hijack the entire application, I think, maybe. But the point that I'm getting to is most library authors can't enforce, for example, best practices like having skip links. So I don't know if you're familiar with skip links, but essentially, if you have a menu on, most websites, you follow the same pattern. You have like a header with the logo, and then a menu, and then maybe some other content, and then you have the main content somewhere down below. And if a user navigates to that page, and a user that relies on keyboards to navigate, they basically have to like tab through if the logo has a link, then it's going to say, home logo or whatever. And then you go through every menu item, and let's say there's like 50 items in the menu for whatever reason, then they have to tab through like 50 times. And then, just to get to the main content on the page. And so that's something that clearly the end developer is going to be building, but I, as a library author, I don't know what your app structure is going to look like, your app or your website. And so the pattern is like, you can have the very first tabbable element on the page be a non-visible or like a visually hidden link. That's just an anchor link to an anchor further down on the page for like the main content. So then when the user that's depending on a keyboard to navigate hits the tab key, they actually land on that link, and it says, do you want to skip the nav, or do you want to go to the main content? And then they can hit that link, skip all of the 50 nav items, and then land on, like set focus onto the main content of the page.
And then they can go back if they want. They can kind of...
Yeah, so if you're using the keyboard to navigate, tab will proceed to the next tabbable element, and holding shift tab will go backwards.
Okay, so the skip forward pass. Okay. That's interesting, because see, I had never heard of that before. And
yeah, so that's one of the things. Like, I'm kind of like scratching my head on how I could implement that. There's also some things as library authors, like I want to be able to provide, but I don't necessarily know how. And it also has to be in an idiomatic way that's easy for developers to work with. Otherwise, they're not going to use it.
Yeah.
So I think so far what I'm kind of landing on is one, enforcing best practices in the library itself, and then two, encouraging or surfacing the best practices and the whys and the hows in your documentation. So I think when you did your YouTube video on Vuetensils, I watched it. It was great. It was awesome.
Thanks.
And when you did it, you like got to the documentation and you're like, yeah, I don't think this part's filled out, but I think he's going to get to it or whatever, just for the tables. Because the tables is one thing that's like I built and just like threw out there, and then I was like, oh, this is actually a lot harder than I thought. But every other component I think is like really important to keep up to date, and then keep the documentation up to date. But then, yeah, also provide like examples on how to do accessibility correctly, you know.
I think you do overall a good job of that, because it feels like you're not just telling us about the accessibility in the components, but you're almost like teaching us as people reading your documentation, like this is the best practice that you should be using because people need to be able to do this. So I thought that was really nice. And you see that sometimes in other docs, like I noticed it with Bootstrap doc drop downs, how they compared hover and on click and stuff like that. But yours is just like all the way throughout your docs.
Cool. Yeah, thanks. Yeah, I think Bootstrap does like I said, Bootstrap does a pretty good job. And I think as library authors and documentation writers, you kind of have to ride the balance of giving just the information that you need for someone to get the point that you're getting to. So I try in the code block examples, I try not to have too much extra fluff. But then at the same time, that's like a really good opportunity to educate someone on like ARIA attributes, right? Or making sure that every label has an input, for example. I think there's a lot of examples that it's easy for me to just put an input tag on the page and like that's all you need because that's the minimum needed for this example for whatever reason. But I try to make a habit of like always following the best practices for accessibility, even in the examples, even if it's not related to the example, because I don't know, people are going to copy and paste it, or maybe someone's going to see that, oh, what is this like role HTML attribute? Like, what does that mean? And then they go to Google and search, and end up on MDN or yeah.
So now that you open source this for people to use, what is it like maintaining and building new components, and people are relying on your code? Do you feel any pressure or nervousness about the maintaining quality and updates and stuff like that?
Yeah. One of the ways that I've kind of addressed that is in the documentation, I make a point of linking to the source code. And most of the source code, most of the components, you should be able to just like copy and paste directly from the one file. I think maybe, there's a lot of libraries that I'm reading through the source code and I have to go to the file where the component is exported from. And then that calls like, that component is importing like 3 other components and then, some utilities, and like, it's really convoluted. And I think that I try to keep the source code to a minimum in case people do want, again, it started out as like, I just want to be able to copy and paste my own work. But I link to them so that people can just copy and paste it themselves, because as a library that's in kind of a beta stage, I want people to be able to keep, a dependable, non-breaking version of it for their own sake if they want. Like, you can import Vuetensils, or you can just copy the source code that you need. And I think the only thing that you would probably have to also bring over is I have a utility function that like just generates a random string, because in many cases you need, for accessibility purposes, you need to reference some sort of ID. So if the user, if the consuming developer doesn't provide an ID, then I need to like generate one. So I mean, besides that, as far as like how does it feel to maintain an open source project, that helps deal with some of the feelings of responsibility or guilt, because there are times when I have to introduce like a breaking change, which isn't a good feeling. But at the same time, I'm like, well, it's not stable version 1 yet, so hopefully people understand that. I haven't gotten anyone complaining about a breaking change, so that's good, or maybe a sign that like no one's using it anyway. So I don't know.
Yeah,
But
actually, I sent you a message when I. Oh no, that was. I think you forgot to export the.
yeah, yeah,
Um,
you're like, hey, this is in the documentation, but it's not usable. Like, cool. Thank you very much. I think that you mentioned that the same day that I published, the update that included that. So that was impressive and also nice to fix.
I had actually been looking at Vuetensils for weeks, and then I started playing around with it, and it was really cool because you published an update to the library while I was using it, and it broke my code. So then I
That's
had to
cool. Yeah.
so then I had to go and figure out why it wasn't, but I think you said you were secretly or silently publishing this update and then trying to keep updating it before people realized it was out, before making a big announcement, and I had already found it. So
Yeah. Yeah. That was weird. I was like, man, who is this person that is like sneaking through my source code and just like throwing shame at me? No, that was cool. Yeah, it's been interesting. I think that uh, there's a lot of developers that I aspire to be a much better open source developer. Like, I think that there's a lot I could do in automating and writing better commit messages that incorporate into a change log automatically. And
yeah.
it's really weird. We're kind of in a golden age of web development, and we get very spoiled by what is available. So, some people expect library maintainer A to behave or provide things like library maintainer B. But so far it's fun and it's rewarding. And like I said, most of it is helping, scratching my own itch. So when I get someone else that's like, hey, I had that same itch and this is great. Like, I just discovered this and this is perfect. It's like, that's really rewarding.
Nice.
Yeah.
So this is kind of an aside, but right now I'm working on a video about Vue CLI
Mm-hmm.
packages, and Vuetify, Element, I think Quasar. There's a whole bunch of these Vue UI component libraries that have turned themselves into CLI packages to make the scaffolding easier in the beginning if you're going to be using that component library. Are you planning on doing something like that?
That is not anywhere on the roadmap
Okay.
right
Version
now.
2, version 3, somewhere else.
Yeah, yeah. Like, so there is one thing. I think I talked about this uh, on the Views on Vue podcast. Is I think Vuetify does like a really cool job. I actually like peep their source code a lot and like check out what they're doing, because they do a really good job. And one of the things that they do is their CLI lets you um, it lets you add components to your project without registering them, and then it will, when you build the project, it will go and like remove any of the library components that you didn't actually use. So it
Nice.
kind of like, yeah, so it kind of does its own sort of tree shaking. Whereas if you start with even components in your own project, or if you're using like a traditional library, I'll call it a traditional library. If you're using Vuetensils, we'll say, you basically have two options in order to start using a component. One is you can import the component and then register it locally, or you can import the component and register it globally. And one thing that they do is like, you don't have to register the components, you just register the plugin, and then like most library plugins, it will go through and register basically all of the components available, and then it'll like at build time kind of like tree shake them out. And that's really cool. I don't know. I feel like I am experiencing slow build times, and I'm wondering if that's part of it. But that would be a cool feature to add somewhere down the road.
Slow build times with Vuetensils or just
No,
in general?
with Vuetify. So I use
Oh,
Vuetify
yeah.
at my company, and yeah, it's like there's a hang up when I start the dev server, or when the like we're working with Netlify to host, and during build times it seems a little bit slow, and I don't know if that's Vuetify, and I'm not trying to say anything bad because I think the feature is really really cool, but I think that if you have to basically register every component and then read through all of the source code and pick only the ones that were used, then that might be a culprit.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, but I would like to kind of like do that myself and see if that is the case. And if not, I mean, the cool thing is like um, you can always do it the old-fashioned way and just register the components from the library anyway. So
Yeah, I think that's what I go back and do before I move it to prod.
mm,
Oh,
yeah, that would be smart.
so Jared said in the chat, I've heard Vuetify is slow for builds, wondering if Vite would speed it up. Have you heard about Vite, Austin?
Yeah, that's the new project. Man, the web development community is so funny. Like, thing came out today, and it's like, yo, when are we gonna get this? Like, let's get that PR. Like Dino just came out today, right? It's like, man, are you gonna support Dino in your things? Like, I don't know, man. I was like, I just do this in my free time. But yeah, I think that's the new project that Evan Yu is working on,
Yeah.
and it would be interesting. So I think it's pronounced Veet.
Oh, really?
I don't know. He likes to name things after French words
Okay.
that have been taken in NPM. Um,
Right, so Vue. That makes sense.
yeah, we'll call it Vite just in case.
Okay.
But so Vite, it kind of uses a lot of the same technology that you're seeing with like Snowpack or Pika. I don't know if you're familiar with those, but basically building for ES modules. And I'm super excited for the ES module, revolution,
Yeah.
because not having to deal with Webpack configurations, or one of the biggest problems, or one of the biggest promises that ES modules gives us is the ability to like only build my part of the application, like the part that the JavaScript that I'm writing is the only part that I need to build, and every other dependency, Lodash or date functions or whatever else, those are going to be coming into the browser as a module from my npm packages. It's weird because we're going kind of full circle back to old web development days, where it's like now we're using ES modules, and before, if you needed jQuery, you would just like import the jQuery script, right? And now today, if you wanted to use like Vite or Snowpack or Vite or Snowpack and jQuery, you would import the jQuery module. But anyway,
So it's breaking it up a lot more. And
yeah,
they're doing
well,
that with HTTP2 kind of, right? Like all the
yeah.
tons of different requests.
So with HTTP2 and ES modules, we'll be able to essentially download all the resources in parallel. So split up, let's say we have Lodash and date functions as a dependency to our project. So we'll have three modules. We'll have date functions, Lodash, and then my app module, right? Yeah. And when my page loads, when a user first goes to my web app, they'll make three requests, one for each of those, and those will come across the wire. And with HTTP2, those will come across in parallel, which would be great. The other benefit we get is, let's say I'm using Lodash and date functions from a CDN. It could be that user went to your web app and you're using date functions and Lodash. And then when they come to my web app, those three requests, two of them are already in their cache. And so they don't even have to download it.
Yeah.
And they only have to download the source code for my app. The other benefit is when I make a change to my source code, these days, if you're using Webpack, Webpack is going to bundle everything up and add a hash to it,
Yeah.
which is great so that we don't have issues with caching. Essentially, as a built-in cache buster. But one issue with Webpack is if I like make a typo fix in my source code, I have to rebuild my entire app, and then the next time the user comes to my app, they have to download the entire bundle all over again. With ES modules, they'll still have, the Lodash and the date functions from the last time they came, and then they'll just have to download the new version of my app, which is cool. Depending on how, I haven't looked into how Vite handles building applications. I imagine that it'll be interesting to see, because in theory, each library author could publish their library as an ES module. So then Vuetify could potentially be a module that would come across same as date functions and Lodash, and then all you would need is your source code module, or probably how it is today. I don't think it supports ES modules. Just going out on a limb there. Today, then that would be part of the build step that builds your apps module.
Yeah.
Hope that answers the question for the user.
Yeah. So we got another question. CW wants to know, if you had more free time, what components would you add first to Vuetensils?
Ooh, C-dubs. One of the components that's been on my to-do list for a long time that I would like to build is a date picker, or like a calendar. I also like make it a point to not include any dependencies in Vuetensils, which is really cool for security or maintainability or bundle size, but it's not so cool as a library author, because then everything that I need, I kind of have to build myself. And there's a lot of things that I'll like find another library that does something similar, and maybe the source code is consumable enough that I can kind of like look at and take some copy paste from it. But yeah, I think a date picker would be great. Something that a user that is using a keyboard can get and navigate and like find, like pick a date and a time that makes sense and is easy to use and accessible.
Is that like web focused, or are you going to have the Android, iOS? I guess you're not doing styling, so you'll probably provide a base case and then let people do what they want with it.
I mean, currently I target the web because that's what I build on.
Yeah.
I don't know what it would take to build for Android and iOS. I think if you're building for those, you're not using HTML anyway.
Well, even so, well, I guess we can use Vue native script and stuff like that, and kind of. Well, no, I guess we're not using DOM elements. We're using different elements that we import. But even on, what about like mobile browsers and stuff? Or you just program it one way?
So it depends how you build your application, right? If you're using something like native script, then yeah, you're using native components to the operating system, which is not going to be HTML, CSS, JavaScript. Or you can use like a web view or something like Cordova, which basically puts HTML into web view, whatever. And in that case, then Vuetensils would naturally work as expected, because you are working within the context of the DOM. Theoretically, another big challenge with like accessibility specifically is like, I'm no expert. I think people that call themselves experts also have the same challenge of everyone that relies on accessibility is a loaded term. So there's a lot of people that rely on this on different things, right? There, a lot of the focus around accessibility is, you think about visually impaired users that rely on screen readers and maybe like a keyboard to navigate, but that's not all of it, right? Accessibility, the word itself is just like, is your content accessible? Like, can people access your content? And yeah, like screen readers, keyboard navigation, those are a big part of it. Visual impairment applies to even people like myself that I don't have as good a vision as I used to have. When I'm writing code all day, I am wearing glasses, and sometimes I'm like having to zoom in to see stuff on different websites and stuff, and like that's part of accessibility as well as device capabilities. You have technical limitations like cross-browser support. How far back do you want to go? You have network limitations, so people that are using devices with slow networks can't access your content. So performance is part of accessibility. Responsive design is part of accessibility. It's loaded. But one of the issues that these like folks like myself deal with that are trying to solve some of these issues is I am not like a 100% visually impaired user. I don't depend on a screen reader. I use my keyboard to navigate because I like to for like getting through forms. I find it easier and faster. Yeah. But I don't use it 100% to navigate a website. And therefore, I don't intimately know what users in that position deal with. So it's hard to say, like, this is the best way. Even if you're following, it happens time and time again, that even if you follow the standards and the best practices described in the W3C, the accessibility guidelines, some of those have to be rewritten because studies come out that this, in fact, is not the best way to do it.
Yeah.
Or,
and I think Joe Caulfield on the accessibility podcast said the guidelines hadn't been updated in 3 or 4 years, maybe.
Yeah.
The W3C ones.
Right. I don't know. I mean, I try to make sure that all of my components are designed with that in mind, because what else am I going to base them off?
It's hard.
But I don't know when it was last updated. And there's a lot that I don't know.
So Jared is saying, when you build your project, what steps have you taken to make contributing to the project easier?
I don't know if he was here. She was on the call around the beginning. Gwen, you were saying that one of the issues with contributing to the project today is there is no contributor's guide. Yeah. So I do want to work on these things that are kind of like peripheral to the actual source code, because that's important. And just as part, like, it's one thing to write source code for open source projects, but that's like half of the work. There's still making sure documentation is there, making sure that you have the DevOps to like actually build it, and then making sure that things like for the community, like a contributor's guide, is there. So I want to do that. What I have done to try and make contributions easier is, one, I link to the source code as much as I can. So that hopefully it's easy to just like get in there. Even in GitHub, if you find a typo in the docs, and you just like click the link to the source code and you just fix it within the GitHub UI, you can do that. And then also good documentation. I mean, I think that just goes a long way, and hopefully, I think getting people on board to an open source project starts with good documentation.
Have you noticed a growth in your users and downloads?
Yeah.
I guess you just released it 6 months ago or 8 months or something.
Yeah, let me pull that up actually and see. I want to pull up the npm link.
All right. So,
But, all right, I don't know if I don't want to be killing live time,
it's
but
okay.
it would be interesting to see like answer the questions of when it was originally published. And so it's got like 93 downloads a week. That's not very much, right? Or well, that's this week, and then last week it was like 400 or 300 or something.
Okay. So
So it
there's,
can fluctuate. It gets some decent stars on GitHub and some forks and stuff. I have seen a growth. I do see, I mean, one of the best ways that I can judge growth is maybe someone reaches out to me or I get more issues on GitHub.
yeah,
Um,
or
but it's hard to say.
contributor.
Yeah.
Yeah. So one thing I've been thinking about doing on this channel, but between you and Joe coming on and other people I've talked to, is it would be great to have something. I don't know if it has to be live, but like a video of someone using a screen reader to navigate these sites and explaining about the different accessibility components. I feel like a lot of people don't know very much about that. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I think anytime that developers that don't use screen readers are exposed to that, it's like an eye-opening moment. Like it's like opening Pandora's box because once you've kind of experienced it for the first time, you can't unsee it.
Yeah.
So I think that would be great. I think one of the VueConf hosts this year went through and gave a talk on accessibility and went through our application and like was live coding some of the changes needed
Hmm.
for using a screen reader. Um,
That's really cool.
yeah, I try and use a screen reader as much as I can when I'm developing things to make things work. As you use it more, you kind of start to like learn the patterns for developing for a screen reader without necessarily having to test using one. But it's still good to test it. But
Yeah.
even then, like again, I'm not a user that uses screen readers all the time, so I'm basing a lot of this work off of assumptions. And anytime you get a user that like legitimately uses it and wants to navigate your application and like can't, um, it's an eye-opening moment.
Yeah.
Like it sucks if someone can't use your project. Like that's just I don't know. You reach we kind of talked about uh, like building automating accessibility for developers is great because a lot of people don't know or don't think about it or don't have the time or the client doesn't ask for it. Um, and you accessibility is a weird uh, balance of business needs versus like kind of ethical dilemmas. And you can make the case, it gets super nuanced, and you can make the case in many different ways. But I generally feel like if I can just add, if I can make someone's life easier or make it more accessible while I'm building it, and I just like learn one thing today that I can apply going forward as I write my code, then you're making progress.
Yeah. I think, well, if you heard Robert C. Martin, he wrote the book Clean Code and he gives talks and stuff. I like one of his examples that he always gives about cars and how there's so much software going on in cars right now that, millions and millions of lines of code that the driver's not in complete control. And software engineers actually have, they're writing code that could affect someone's life now. And it's completely unregulated. Our jobs are completely unregulated. So he's pushing for more standards and regulation around testing and code best practices. But I think it would be really great to see, standards and regulation and just our whole community adopting accessibility standards instead of it being an afterthought. We should be teaching new people coming in and, saying that, this is the best practice for accessibility. We have a lot of UI best practices, And I think that's because most people don't use screen readers and these other things. So we want to make the UI because that covers, I don't know, like 99% of people. But, what about the other 1 or 2% of people that need screen readers? I think we also need, I guess, stronger regulations and more of a community push towards accepting standards and, like everyone has to be using these standards kind of.
Yeah, we're in a really interesting field because I think the rate of web developers or software developers doubles every like 5 years,
Yeah.
something like that, something crazy. And so, to touch on an early point of web development is essentially wild, wild west. Like there's no regulations.
Mm-hmm.
I can write some code and put it up on the internet in 10 minutes, which is crazy because especially when you consider the amount of people that it can reach. Like if I was an engineer and building a bridge, like I have to go through so much school and I have to go through so many certificates and regulations, and to build that bridge, it has to pass like so many tests and checks because if something goes wrong and that bridge falls, like people will die.
Yeah.
But the same applies to software development. Like if I'm writing code that's going to end up in a major manufacturer's heart rate monitor, or like a what is this thing called, the pacemaker, and my code is unregulated, and I get a bug in there, people could die as well, and that could go out to millions of that. The fact that we write code, we build things that end up on the internet, we have the largest potential for scale in any industry.
Yeah.
Because we can reach millions of people tomorrow. I could launch a product today, get on the front page of Reddit, and I can reach millions of people tomorrow. Like that's crazy.
Yeah, it is.
So the impact we can have, like, yeah, to your point, it's super important to know about these things and try and do things in the best way possible. But that's also really difficult when your industry doubles every 5 years. That means half of the industry has less than 5 years of experience.
Yeah, skews heavily young.
Yeah. So how do we address that? Well, part of it is, library maintainers like myself have one of the best opportunities, because if the fact that the largest Vue library, I'm assuming it's still Vuetify, the fact that the largest Vue library has accessibility built in, that means that that's X number of people's X number of NPM downloads a week that don't even need to know about it, don't even need to think about it,
Yeah.
right? So that's one way. I think also just having people that are aware about it, creating content. If you have one good blog post or one good video that kind of takes off and you can reach 10, 20, 500, 1,000 people with it,
Yeah.
then it just takes a little bit of learning and talking about it, and then as you advance in your career, I think I've always thought it's really important. I've had some opportunities to mentor younger developers, and I think it's really important to kind of walk through the last mentee that I had, assigned him a task, and he went out and built it, and it looked great. It matched the designs and everything, and I said, cool. Now, and it was a list. I think he didn't know how to use Vue, and so we were like learning. I gave him a task to learn how to use Vue. It may have been like just a to-do list, right, where you can like have the to-dos and then close them. I said, this is great. Thank you for building this. It looks good. Now, can you walk me through the application and remove that first to-do? And he went to reach for the mouse, and I took the mouse away. And I said, can you do it without using this? And that's when he kind of had that aha moment of like, oh, I was like, yeah, there's people that can't use that. So let's run through your code and let's look at these opportunities and like, let's talk about it and just have those discussions. So I think if you have the opportunity to mentor anyone, it's fantastic. It's a great way to give back to the community and like really help someone out.
Yeah, that's a great example.
Yeah, it's a lot of fun. He's a cool guy.
So Jared asks, speaking of tests, does Vuetensils have any tests? Just view test utils, etc.
Short answer, no, not yet. No, like,
Is that on the bucket list too?
yeah, definitely. UI, so testing is a really good practice, and
That's
I
what every
love work.
company says.
Yeah, no, I like. I mean, if you work, like, my projects at work make sure definitely to have tests. I think if you're working on a project that has testing is also kind of like a loaded issue, right? So if you're working on a project that is like has some mission critical things, like those things need to be tested. And I think a lot more mission critical things happen on backend. So like your backends should definitely be like super well tested. And I'm not trying to have a cop out for like not writing tests for the front end, but I think that front end tests are much more interesting and nuanced, right? Because what do you need to write a test for that you don't actually see happen in the browser, right? Like as you're building something, I'm going to see if the button is red or if the button is green when I click some things. And once you get to a certain level of complexity, those tests will help. Or if you're building a large application that has a lot of things going on and you're using Vuex and you want to make sure that if the user is logged in and the user has a certain role, then they're able to see this component and they don't see that component. And like, yeah, I think those tests are important. But a lot of the Vuetensils use cases are like, I want to make sure that the button just lands on the page and I can see that visually. Yeah. And then I'm in the Chrome, or I'm in the dev tools anyway. And so I can see, like, when I click the button, this ARIA attribute needs to toggle on or off, or like show or not. So on one hand, I think testing is really important. I think it's great working in a code base that is well tested, because it just feels better to like know that you're not introducing breaking changes. There are some things that could be tested. So for example, I talked about the random string generator for generating IDs if they don't exist. That's something that would serve well for like unit testing. But no, short answer, it doesn't really have any tests besides the visual tests and like using it in my own applications.
All right, so one more question. CW asks, so if you could quit your day job, would you take Vuetify with you, or would you just keep building up Vuetensils?
So I don't really understand what I take Vuetify with me. Did they mean would I take Vuetensils with me?
Or like he's meaning. Sorry, someone just told a bad joke in the chat. So I think he means, would you take Vuetify and keep using Vuetify afterwards, or would you ditch Vuetify altogether and just use Vuetensils in the future?
That I'm going to give you the famous, like, it depends. So if I'm joining a company, if I need to get a project, well, I would probably use Vuetensils. It's a biased answer because, I mean, I know it has everything. It has most of the things that I need. Anything that it doesn't have that I need is an opportunity for me to build something that I want to have in it anyway. Okay. And, again, it really depends on the circumstances of the project that I'm working on. If it's a personal project, I'm going to use Vuetensils because I really like having custom, bespoke, unique interfaces. If it's a project that I want to look like material design, then yeah, like Vuetify is probably one of the best choices. Um, if it's a project, if I'm joining a team and we want to have something that has a lot of components built in, and we want to be able to build out a lot of things quickly and have something that has good documentation, Vuetify is it's a really excellent project. And so there's cases where outside of my own personal bias, like Vuetify is the best choice, and there's cases where Vuetensils may be the best choice, and there's cases where neither of those are the best choice.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So I'm gonna read you this.
Is this a joke?
I thought it was a joke. So I'm really bad with jokes and humor. So I thought it was at first, but I think it's a play on your name. So what do you get when you mix a cow and a dinosaur?
Oh, I really want to take some time to get the answer, but I also know that we're like on a live stream, so I don't know.
A steakosaurus.
Okay.
Which leads me to ask you, so how, if people want to reach you or get in touch or follow you online, what's the best place? Or where are the best places?
So I'm pretty much everywhere online at Stegosource, Stegosource. Pretty active on Twitter these days. I've got a website. I'm on GitHub at Stegosource. Website is stegosource.com. Twitter is Stegosource, in case that wasn't obvious.
So I do have the Twitter and GitHub linked in the description if anyone wants to see that. And I'll add your website there.
Cool.
All right. So is there anything else you want to say? Any final words?
Yeah, I mean, if anyone is interested and wants to use the project, I would love to just hear that anyone's using it. That's always really rewarding. If anyone wants to help the project grow, then writing content or creating content, creating issues and pull requests. I mean, it can be as simple as just having an issue of an idea that would be good or bad to have in there. Yeah. There are some open issues. I like to keep issues open for things that I do want to get around to eventually. And if it's something that may not fit the library, then I'm still happy to discuss on there, and yeah, open to helping grow the Vue community and the accessibility community.
Awesome. So one last thing, Derek, how about we work on tests for Vuetensils during the next contributors marathon on Discord? Derek, so I'm not sure what that is. I mean, I would be open to thinking about it on a live stream, but if there's a special contributors marathon going on, then I want to know about it. So can you post that in the comments below after we wrap this up? So yeah, Austin, thanks so much for coming on.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, it was really cool seeing someone else make, just randomly seeing someone else make a video on Vuetensils, and so this has been really a pleasure, and I really appreciate the opportunity.
Yeah, and we'll definitely have you back when you're at version 1.0 and this channel's a little bit bigger.
Okay, cool. Yeah, I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah. Have a great night. Bye.
Thanks, you too.